I made a ton of mistakes when I made this jeans katana. Now, as you can see right here, it actually cuts through stuff, and I'm really pleased with how it works, but the whole process was kind of a mess. So let's go over all 10 steps that it took me to go from jeans to a fully finished katana. Step number 1, this is actually just cutting up the jeans. Now, I know that this seems like a very trivial step, but this is where I really started making my first mistake, and that's not cutting the seams out of the jeans. I should have completely cut those out because when I come to the flattening stage of things, that's where I ran into trouble. On to step number 2, epoxy. If you are like me and you haven't purchased epoxy from Lowe's or Home Depot in a while, I went and it turns out they just don't carry it anymore. So I ended up getting this fiberglass epoxy. It kind of worked out, but I would not use it again in a future project, and it's just because of how expensive it was. I thought I would only need one, but I ended up buying 2 just in case, and both of those did not even cover the amount that I really wanted for this project. So by the time that I ran out of the epoxy, I ended up having to fold the material over on itself to be able to achieve the thickness that I was looking for, and it ended up working, but because I didn't cut out the seams, I was left with a lot of variance in there. So I just went ahead and stacked a bunch of heavy stuff on top of it and really hoped for the best, and it kind of worked out. Step number 3, actually flattening this. Now, I first just took it straight off and took it to the CNC machine so that I could start referencing things. Thankfully, the very bottom of the material was extremely smooth because I had put it on a piece of MDF covered in Tyvek tape so that it wouldn't fully stick to it. So I had a nice smooth surface to be able to put down on the CNC so that I could start really making it flat. And it took freaking forever. I would start off at a section, it would be too low, and then the bit would get buried, and then thankfully I've got a great CNC machine and it actually shut down during the process, which was extremely helpful. But I was going back and forth, reflattening areas, taking it down a little bit at a time until I really got what I was looking for. An extra annoyance was at the very end where there was kind of the folded over fabric, all the seams and stuff. They hadn't fully soaked with the epoxy, therefore they weren't really millable. It was just kind of like taking a pair of jeans and putting it on your CNC. The entire time I was really worried that it was going to really screw something up, but it didn't. And if you're wondering why I don't have my dust collection, it's because I was shooting this video and I wanted to show what was happening. But sheesh, jeans dust, no bueno. If you're doing this, definitely use dust collection because that was a mess that I'm still cleaning up. My shoes are tracking it into the house even 2 weeks later. But once I got it flattened, I took it over to the miter saw, I cut off the ends to the table saw, and then I got a nice blank cutout so that I could really understand where I was going to be cutting my parts out. All right, so step 4 is to actually cut out the sword, and this is what I had created all of this blank for. And it was so nerve-wracking when I finally got to the place where I really needed to make the cuts. I ended up cutting out 2 of these sword blanks, and then you can see on the top and the bottom, I ended up cutting out these little discs that end up making up the handle. I really knew that I wanted to be able to space those so that it just kind of incorporated the jeans design into the sword a little bit more. So I ended up using all the jeans to be able to cut out 2 of the blade blanks as well as a ton of these little inserts, and thankfully it worked out. The first time I messed up the height a little bit, so I had to run it a second time, but the tape held, everything worked out exactly the way that it should, which brings us on to step number 5, which is all of the other parts. Now, in order to make up the sword, it contains essentially 4 different parts, which is the blade, the hand guard, and then all of these little discs that are incorporated into the handle. And then at the very bottom, one of these discs has a brass coin in it, which we're going to be able to fiber laser in a little bit to be able to fully mark the brass. Now, all these discs are made out of different thicknesses of a compressed resin material. It's a really awesome material to work with, but unfortunately, the bit that I was using needed to be extremely small so that all these parts would really fit together well. So I did have a little bit of deflection, which meant that either I was going to have to sand or file down every single part, or what I ended up doing is sanding down the tang of the blade itself so that everything fit together quite nicely. Step number 6 is, like I just mentioned, this little brass coin at the bottom. I ended up using my fiber laser to engrave in the Blade of Gains and have my logo, and then 2023. If you're interested in what the Blade of Gains means, on my second channel, which I started up specifically for this video, you can go and check out why I ended up making this sword, which I'm really proud of, but turns out is not main channel worthy. So in order for me to do the engraving, I went ahead and took a brass blank, I hammered it into the disc that makes up the very bottom of the sword. I took it over to the fiber laser, which engraved the brass itself. Yes, this this is a fiber laser, not a CO2 laser, so I'm actually engraving into the metal. It's a super cool process, one that I'm definitely still learning about. I'm very thankful for Thunder Laser for sending it over, and I've got a very specific project that I'm going to be using it for, and I cannot wait to show it off because to my knowledge, it is not on the internet at all, and it is one of my dream projects to complete. I'm so excited about it, but there's a lot of effort and knowledge that goes into it that I'm still kind of working out. So hopefully that'll be up on the channel very soon. Before I did all the assembly, I went ahead and sharpened the katana, which means that I took it over to the belt sander and I just kind of took my time with going back and forth and seeing what actually looked good, but also held an edge. And yeah, the thing actually does have an edge on the blade. It is kind of sharp. It's of course for looks more than anything else, but it does have a little bit of an edge on it. I wish that I would have used a few different variances of jeans in this, maybe like a red or something like that. I feel like it would pop a little bit more, but I do have slightly a Damascus look to it, which I'm pumped about. Now the epoxy assembly, like I said, I couldn't find epoxy anywhere, and I didn't want to use 5-minute because I was afraid that it was going to set up too quickly. So at Harbor Freight of all places, I was able to find some epoxy that was like 15 to 20 minute set time, and I ended up assembling the entire thing. I had dry assembled it to make sure that the pattern is what I was looking for. One little annoying thing that happened is I had gone to all the trouble to, of course, engrave this little brass blank, and I ended up assembling it upside down because I was just in epoxy mode and thinking how quickly I could put this together, and unfortunately did not orient it in the right way. So the little blank down here is upside down, which is kind of annoying, which no one would have noticed without me bringing up. And it annoys me enough that I did bring it up. After the epoxy had set, I took it over for some final sanding, which meant that I was just kind of like shaping the handle on the belt sander. And since it was all together, it was a little bit difficult to get into all the nooks and crannies, but we did finally get a nice uniform finish. I ended up leaving the blade completely bare of finish. It is just natural because I think that it looks a lot better. The second you put finish on it, it darkens it and it really removes a lot of the tones on this. So I really wanted to make sure that you could see that it was made out of jeans. But the bottom, I just put some super glue all over the handle and that darkened it up a whole lot. Now there's absolutely no way that I was going to build a katana without trying to cut some things. So yeah, I ended up cutting up some bananas and cucumbers, and then I took it out and cut open a can. Thankfully, I made 2 of these swords, and this bad one is the one that I was using to cut up all the vegetables in the can as well, and I got some nasty dings on the blade. And as you can see, they're extremely flimsy, way more flimsy than I first thought. But I really want to try this whole like micarta thing over again. So I'm going to go to the thrift store next time and buy a few different colored jeans and make some thrift carta with a very cool project in mind. This is how long it took me to actually make this video. Yeah, it took a freaking long time because specifically this other video that I've got on my second channel really explains why it took so long. But this video has just been going for over 20 something weeks at this point, and I'm so happy that it is all finally done. And if you're brand new to the channel, every single video I show how long it took me to create it, so that at the end of the year I can add all of those numbers together and put it against my Google AdSense that the channel has made so that I can see my hourly rate for YouTube for 2023. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and subscribe because that video will be coming out at the beginning of 2024. I'm also so thankful for all of my patrons. It is just incredible that I've got people out there that are willing to support me on Patreon. If you like the channel and you'd like to support it further, Patreon is a great way to do that, as well as my CNC files on cncyalater.com. I've got a ton of awesome stuff over there and a lot more coming because I am doing Make Timber again this year, which means that I'm going to have a ton of projects that are mainly meant for makers to be able to create and sell so that they can pay off their tools or just make a little bit of side money or even fully go into business for themselves with what they make. So yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. I really appreciate it, and I will see y'all later. Bye. Fat Jeans Katana versus Banana Take 1. Okay, it works.